the next day.
Let's talk about the Russo-Ukrainian War. So, welcome to the Unemployment Club. Basically, this is a channel in which I just talk about random things that I'm either passionate or interested about, and in this case, I am going to talk about the Russo-Ukrainian War. To keep this short, I am not going to talk about the centuries-old hate between Russians and Ukrainians. I could make a whole video on that, but for the sake of keeping this close and make it a summary, I am just going to talk about it from recent history. So I am not going to talk about this Ukraine or this Ukraine or that Ukraine, definitely not about this Ukraine. I am going to specifically talk about these two Ukraines. Why? Because if not, this video is going to be 3 hours. I can make other videos about the Kievan Rus, or how the Russians and the Ukrainians started hating each other basically since the age of their conception. Basically, I want to make this video easy enough to understand that even a child with a senile earthworm for a brain could understand it. Actually, I even made a list, so I don't lose track.
6 months later.
List. So to understand this, we have to go specifically back on time. Back on time to Christmas Day of 1991, aka the collapse of the USSR. To understand this, first the Baltics declare independence, then it was Belarus, Ukraine and Russia themselves, and then the last one was actually Kazakhstan, which decided it would be cool to be the USSR for an entire 4 days before declaring independence. After the collapse of the USSR, Russia and Ukraine actually kept fairly good relations. They weren't really arguing, they were close partners in trade, and they shared a common history, and they often regarded each other as brotherly nations. But of course, as all geopolitical disasters, there were some uncertainties. And the biggest one of all was the Crimean question. So, who does Crimea belong to? Obviously to Ukraine. But realistically, you ask today, who does Crimea belong to? You're gonna get some people saying, oh, it belongs to Ukraine. And then you're going to get other people who say, oh, it belongs to Russia. So, the answer is a little bit more intricate than all that. By de facto, it belongs to Russia. Why? Because they currently have control of it. By de jure, it belongs to Ukraine because they are the rightful owners of Crimea, as it should be. Now, how did exactly Ukraine end up with Crimea? The reason why it ended up with Crimea was because a certain man named Nikita Khrushchev gifted it to them. That's right, gifted it. As if I buy you a white monster right now and I'm like, this is yours, drink it. It was more seen as a gift of friendship. It was like being like, oh, look at us, we're so friends right now. Like, you know, there's finally peace about all the crimes that were committed during the Soviet Union before Khrushchev. It was also for management. It was much easier to manage Crimea if the Ukrainian SSR had it, so therefore it was also considered as that. And at the end of the day, it didn't really matter because Ukraine was under sovereign control of the Soviet Union, and Crimea was under control of the Soviet Union. So it was very symbolic, and it was not like giving territory to a country that you have no relations with. It would be like giving Kaliningrad back to Germany after World War II. There was no territory lost. It was just a different administration. So in 1991, when the USSR collapsed, the republics basically kept their borders as they were within the Soviet Union. So in this case, Ukraine kept Crimea because they owned it since 1954. And that is how Crimea ended up being part of Ukraine. And it was not only Ukraine who kept their territorial
What? English, motherfucker! Do you speak it?
their territorial integrity for now. Belarus, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, basically all of the republics divided themselves as they were within the Soviet Union. So it was not like Ukraine was a special case. Ukraine was just doing basically what every other republic was doing, including Russia. So when that happened, there was no guarantee that those borders were not bound to change anytime soon. They were recognized by the UN, but it was missing some form of agreement, some form of document that made those borders even more official. And that's why Russia, Ukraine, the US, the UK, and other countries gathered in Budapest in 1994 to discuss the Budapest Memorandum.
Ukraine and the United States of America.
December 5, 1994. Leaders of Ukraine, Russia, the United States, and Britain signed the Budapest Memorandum.
So now, what was the Budapest Memorandum? Well, before we discuss this, there is very important things to understand. Ukraine, when it got its independence, it also inherited a bunch of nuclear weapons. The world was worried about what Ukraine would do with them. Ukraine was a fairly new country. We don't know what kind of government is going to take. What if they misuse them? There is a lot of political instability, economical instability. What if they get mismanaged, they get lost? What if they retaliate? What if they do something stupid? There were valid concerns by both Russia and the United States, and also the UK. So in order to give Ukraine some form of guarantee or reassurance, to put it that way, they gather in Budapest and sign the Budapest Memorandum, which basically deals with two things: territorial integrity and the nukes. Basically, Ukraine gave up their nukes in order to have their borders officially recognized specifically by Russia. Now, in hindsight, you look at this and you're like, wow, that was the worst deal of time. In 1994, that sounded like the best deal of the time. Now, you look at it from a 1994 perspective and you're like, wow, this is amazing. I just give up my nukes and no one is ever going to invade me, right? Right? Whoa, that was the worst deal of time. So I basically gave up my nukes to be absolutely fucking destroyed. Yes, you did. Now, it's important to understand that this was not a Russian diplomat, this was not somebody weird, this was agreed by Boris Yeltsin and the Ukrainian president at the time, which I don't remember his name, I will leave it here somewhere. I think it was Leonid. I know it sounded like ketchup, but it wasn't ketchup, it was crab chop or Leonid something. Now we have to understand what happened, what caused Russia to invade Ukraine? What was the catalytic? What really triggered Putin's nuts? What really fucking pissed him off? And that was because Ukrainians were tired of being, I guess you can say, as poor as Russia. Or they were tired of being a Russian puppet. They were tired of Russia, period. So this now brings us to the Euromaidan.
Шановне товариство, брати і сестри українці, нині
November 21st of 2013, Viktor Yanukovych suspended a trade deal with the European Union. This was a trade deal. This was not joining the EU. This was not cutting all trading ties with Russia. They just wanted a trade deal with the European Union. And Viktor Yanukovych couldn't even give them that. The Ukrainians were pissed. November 21st, that happened, and November 24th, thousands of people took to the streets. By December, the protests kept growing, and essentially they became encampments in the Maidan Square. This led to a bunch of political instability, and Yanukovych essentially decided that it was time to break the protest. Now you would think, how is he going to break the protest? Is he going to give the Ukrainian people what they want? No, he's just going to open fire onto them. Yeah, that's right, real bullets, real pow-pows were fired upon Ukrainian civilians. People who were just protesting for a better future. Now, this of course terrified Yanukovych, and essentially he started reading the writing on the wall. And the writing on the wall said, "Get the fuck out of office." But he did it in the most despicable way possible. He fled Ukraine. He fled Ukraine to Russia. When that happened, the Ukrainian Rada decided that he was unfit to fulfill his duties, and there were new elections to be held. A more pro-European candidate was elected. After Viktor Yanukovych, Petro Poroshenko, the Candyman, which is how he's known in Ukraine and in Russia, because he's the owner of Roshen, which is a Ukrainian candy company, which is very famous in post-Soviet countries. Yanukovych fled, and now Russia was started to become increasingly worried about Ukraine. And not because Russia was the worried parent. No, this was more like the drug dealer who's going to lose his fucking client. Russia did what Russia does best, and that was the annexation of Crimea.
As they neared the Russian troops, they broke into the Ukrainian national anthem. Even when the Russians fired warning shots in the air, the first shots of this crisis, they didn't stop marching.
So on February, Yanukovych left. Casually, a couple of days later, or maybe a little bit more than a couple, Russia annexes Crimea. Now, the annexation of Crimea was basically Russian forces without insignia just walking in and saying, "No, we are patriots from Crimea," and then just taking over the peninsula. But they were literally Russian soldiers, just without any identification. In May, the war on Donbass started. And the conflict in Donbass, it kind of froze. At first, it was like Russia never acknowledged their independence up until basically 3 days before the war or something like that. I'll leave the real number here. But Russia didn't directly, as far as I was able to find out, they were never directly involved in the conflict. They were more like just sending military equipment and stuff to the Russian separatists in Donbass. And then, which included giving them armored vehicles and weapons, which is, Then Crimea declared their independence from Ukraine, and then in a bogus referendum, they voted to become part of Russia. Now in 2015-2016, the conflict froze, and after that, there were many other agreements, like the Minsk Agreement 1 and 2, and all of that. Which it was Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus trying to come to an agreement about what was going to happen with that. And I guess Russia essentially got tired of waiting. But the Donbass war froze. The lines were not moving much. Russia formalized its annexation of Crimea and made it part of the Russian Federation. Now, in 2019, Volodymyr Zelensky was elected. When Volodymyr Zelensky was elected, he did promise to ease up on the language laws. After the annexation of Crimea, Ukraine became very pro-Ukraine, meaning they wanted to make Ukrainian more used in the Russian-speaking regions of Ukraine, such as Kharkiv, Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, Kherson, Odessa. All of these places have very large Russian-speaking populations, and he actually said that he was going to ease up on that. Like, he said, like, you know, maybe they could work a deal out in which maybe they will be like co-official or almost at the same level as Ukrainian, still promoting Ukrainian, but also letting them have their Russian-speaking world inside of Ukraine. But apparently that was not good enough for Vladimir Putin. Which, in return, this brings us to today, the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine. So, February 22nd, 2022, a new war in Europe broke out officially. Vladimir Putin said that it was a special military operation. That's like me going to the store and stealing money and saying, no, I am not robbing you, I am just launching a special financial operation, which basically implies me taking your money. It's stupid. It's stupid. You're just say it. You're just going to invade. It's fine. No, well, it's not fine, but there is no need to lie about it. There's no need to try to be politically correct. You're the least politically correct person there is. Just say, I am declaring war. That's it. So that is basically how the events lit up. Of course, this is very simplified. If you guys like the video, I will make a more in-depth version. Probably instead of 15 minutes, it will be more like half an hour to an hour. It will take me time to organize it. And we're left with this circus that we know today. So this is my simplified version of the roots of the Russo-Ukrainian conflict. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you like it. If you dislike it, hit the dislike button. And if you want me to make more videos in the future, just let me know topics, and if I find them interesting, I'll make them. I am Raul. This is the Unemployment Club. See ya.